Hey everyone, and welcome to Speakerman Speaks Retail with me, Carol Speakerman. I help companies get credit for the great stuff they already do and land bigger deals in their retail B2B businesses. My podcast is all about bringing retail thought leadership across categories, borders, business models, and touch points through my latest retail trajectories and interviews with industry experts who help us chart the course to what's next. It was so great meeting up with friends old and new at NRF last month, and I had a blast hosting KWI's Retail Restored series during the show. Stay tuned for some great updates on that. And right now, we're wrapping up my People-Powered Retail series. My guest today has been empowering retail teams from a young age. Brian Librach rose through the retail ranks to serve as VP of Stores for Urban Outfitters and Pacific Sunwear. Most recently, he ran international stores in Canada for Old Navy. Brian's book, The Retail Leader's Roadmap, will be released next month, and it's chock full of tips and tools that help the next generation of retail stars reach their full potential and play a role in creating retail's exciting new future. You'll be hearing a lot about Brian in the coming weeks and months, and I know you'll love this sneak preview. So, hi, Brian. It's great to have you here. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Carol. It's great to be here.
You bet. And congratulations on the book launch. If I have it right, I think the book launch is now on March 12th. Is that right?
That's correct. We moved it up about a month, so we're looking good.
Oh, that's great. It's interesting because our mutual friend Ron Thurston connected us, and I interviewed Ron right after his book came out. I think it's really great that people like you and Ron are trying to pave the way for future retail leaders, and that you're so passionate about just keeping people interested in retail and excited about working in retail. But you're definitely attacking it from different angles, and so I'm really excited about exploring that with you. I think it's really interesting that you're calling your book a diagnostic tool. So can you tell me more about that and why you took that approach?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say it started, I was probably 21, 22 years old, and I read Jack Welch, one of his early books. And although there's a lot of Jack Welch I don't necessarily adopt, there's a lot that I did and kind of made my own. But he referred to the 4 E's of leadership, and they basically were his kind of competencies that he evaluated other people on. And I used those for a really long time, but felt that they became a bit outdated and essentially came up with what my own were based on where I noticed I was either winning or succeeding, or more importantly, I noticed when I was stuck. I noticed when I was what I refer to as misfiring. And so whenever I was misfiring, I wanted to recognize what was happening or what wasn't happening. And so the book was really written with that in mind. And it has all of the detail of the things that would occur. So if you think of like a health diagnostic or your car diagnostic, one little thing might be what's keeping your car from running effectively or from your health being what it's supposed to be. And you need to be able to recognize what it is. And the problem in a lot of cases is, I like to refer to it as 8 out of 10 leaders are a little bit too busy doing their jobs to really actually pay attention to what you need. I hate to say it. And so this book is hopefully an opportunity where you can take control of your own career pathing and your own development and recognize when you're misfiring. It gives you some advice on what to do with that information.
Sounds like you're encouraging people, at least initially, to take more of a self-directed approach and own your own destiny and maybe even have the tools to be able to evaluate where you are before you make the next move.
The book really is entirely about owning it and doing it yourself and taking control of your own destiny. The whole premise is really broken into 3 parts. You've got your build your character section, your build your connections section, and your build your plan section. Those are the 3 pillars. Your build your character section is really the fundamentals or the hard skills, outworking, outlearning, being the example, being accountable, being disciplined, the core competencies of what you need to do. And you could be hugely successful if that's all you do. You're not going to lead people, but you can be hugely successful at whatever it is that you do individually. Build your connections is when you shift to incorporating other people into your career success, your development, your ability to communicate, and your ability to influence. And then the build your plan part is really kind of the pen to paper. I really spell out, here's the things you have to do to win, and here's the things that you have to do to be able to continually learn every single time you take on a new role and responsibility. And hopefully folks will read it cover to cover and then have it close to them. And they'll pick it up when they see themselves misfiring and recognize what it is that they're misfiring at, or pick it up when they see somebody that they care about that's misfiring and offer them a particular chapter that will help them get unstuck.
When you talk about taking on a new role, recently I noticed online, in LinkedIn and other platforms, You've been sharing some personal stories about your own career trajectory and how it wasn't exactly a linear leap to the top. In some cases, I think you took lateral moves and other things that you might even call a demotion to move ahead with your career. So how would you, especially when you're talking about assessment tools, how would you advise people who want to build a career in retail to assess those individual opportunities as they arise?
It was a demotion. In a way, I moved 3,000 miles away and took quite a bit less money to join an organization that I really wanted to be.
I hope it was at least in a beautiful area.
Well, I left Venice Beach, California, which was really hard on the soul, but we went to Fort Lauderdale, Florida, so we stayed in the sun. But to me, accountability is the linchpin of the whole thing, and it's the fourth practice in the book, but specifically acknowledging and embracing your reality. I like to think about acknowledging your reality as you get it in the head, you understand it. And embracing your reality is kind of where your heart understands it. You need both. Like, for example, when I was interviewing and looking at different opportunities, I had to accept the reality that was in front of me and the opportunities that were in front of me. And the one that was the right one was the one that was 3,000 miles away, because I knew who I was going to work for. And that was the right decision for me to make at the time and for my wife and I to make at the time. And so I just recommend folks just stare what is the reality in the face and use that information to make the best decision for yourself. Whether that's a linear move, whether that's a demotion, whether that's changing organizations, kind of have to stare what's in front of you in the face.
It's much needed advice because we live in this hustle culture where you can feel like you're always missing out and the clock is ticking and other people are clawing their way up. And I think probably having the determination to just move forward from there holds a lot of weight and hopefully puts people at ease.
Yeah, and you have to have confidence in yourself. Like once you decide to make whatever the decision is, assume it's the right decision. Put the doubt away because you have to deliver on whatever the decision was. And so I knew I had 12 months to get back to being a regional. That was my goal. That was my expectation.
Did you hit it?
I did. Did it 9 months. So I exceeded the expectation a little bit. But I knew what I had to do and I had to have the confidence that I could get it done if I was to make that decision.
Awesome. Well, one of my top retail trajectories that just won't go away, and in fact, it's stronger than ever, is that the store is still the core. Retailers and brands are unapologetically reinvesting in their stores after obsessing on the digital space for many years. And as part of that, a lot of them are doubling down on training, whether they're providing it internally and trying to build their own training programs or whether they're outsourcing it to third parties. So what advice do you have when it comes to training store teams and managers and field leaders, that work that you've done throughout your career? You've talked about the self-evaluation piece of it. How would you advise those who are in a position to influence others and train others?
It's interesting because the first comment that you made, I agree, it's back on stores. Like everybody's talking about brick and mortar, and I love it because I'm a stores person. Where I see the attention being back on stores, outside of some companies, I still see a huge gap in training and development. I see a huge gap in caring for people first. And it's mostly from what I'm seeing over the 35 years that I've been in the business is financial woes, budget cuts. We're looking at a line item and figuring out to kick off the year what we need to do. And so scope is getting bigger for people. And so as scope gets bigger, there's less time to really focus in and observe what needs to be done with people because you have too many people at your disposal to be able to lead. Human resources has become more about risk management and compensation and less about people. And when I first came up, when HR was just a new thing in retail, I learned a ton from my HR team. But the teams have become more about risk and more about compensation. And then L&D, I can count how many people are on L&D on one hand in an organization. There's just not many left. So the generalists, the people in the stores, they're left with bigger scopes in a lot of cases than what they should have and not a lot of resources to lean onto. That's ultimately why the book is written, because I want to fill the gap. And I don't want to do it for one organization anymore. I truly want to be able to do it for the masses in whatever country you happen to be in, because you have to take ownership. To me, that's the biggest thing, is we have to teach people how to own what it is that they want. And when I talk about build your connections and I talk about the need for other people to start to become a part of your success equation, that's when it gets really hard, because how do you control how other people perceive your communication or how other people perceive your influence? You can't, but you can do really good work to influence and communicate in such a way that you do have better control than what you wouldn't have. For me, the biggest thing is if we all invested more in our own development, we'd be much better off for it.
So it sounds like we're going back to self-determination rather than relying on these big entities to make it happen for you.
Yeah, and I think part of it could be when I grew up in retail, we didn't have Google, we didn't have the internet. Like there's so many resources, me being able to put a book out, there's so many resources at people's disposal, but people have to be eager to do it on their own and not look for it in others. And like I said, I think at the beginning of the podcast, I do believe that 8 out of 10 leaders are just too involved or have too much scope to really give the time and attention that some people might need and want. And so how do we make sure those 8 people are still taken care of? And I think the sooner organizations can recognize the productivity that can come from people and figure out how to monetize it, because that's the hard part. When you're looking at a P&L, you can easily monetize. If I cut here, if I do this, this is what we're going to profit if we deliver this kind of sales. But you could 4, 8, 10x productivity if you have a best-in-class workforce. But you can't monetize it. You can't put it on paper. Most companies can. And I think that's what gets in our way.
What's your view on upskilling? And is this yet another area where folks who want to work in retail and become retail leaders have to just rely on their own determination? Or are there ways, do you think, to institutionalize that?
I'm a fan of the unannounced visit all the way up to the CEO. I'm a fan of small, non-entourage visits where you can actually get intimate with the individuals and have really great dialogue. So my recommendation to organizations is if you really want to know what's needed, stop traveling in packs, lose the entourage, get comfortable doing unannounced, pop into stores throughout the country, not just in your backyard, understand what's consistent and what's not. And what I find is if something's wrong in the majority of stores, we got to look in the mirror. There's something wrong with the organization, the communication, or the leader. If something's wrong in a small subset of stores, it's the individuals leading those stores that need some skill set development specific to them. But I think organizations can do a better job of recognizing if 70% of their stores, for example, are misfiring in something. Okay, well, there's something we're probably doing that's big enough to cause an obstacle for the majority of the fleet. So what do we need to do differently? But the only way they're going to recognize that 70% of the fleet have a problem is to get out there, get to see a really good subset of stores and do it in a way where what they see is real, and then be comfortable looking themselves in the mirror to determine what needs to happen next with, of course, a group of people. So they're not making a decision on their own.
Good old-fashioned management by walking around.
In a lot of ways, if you talk about like brick and mortar and stores being the most important thing, again, you can't do it from the office. Sure, there's a lot of work that has to get done from behind the scenes, but when you really want to know what's needed to make the customer experience, employee or external, better, you have to find a way to see it. And the field leaders are primarily the ones that are going to do that. So you got to bring them into the fold often.
I know that your experience has been really steeped in apparel and fashion and what they call discretionary categories. And these are the very categories that drive a lot of profitability for retailers. So what have you learned in terms of the role that store associates play in driving these critical categories and perhaps overcoming what seem to be insurmountable odds to get people to part with their cash?
People matter and people work for people. And so when you have a happy workforce in a store, your customer is going to fork over some more cash. But when you have unhappy, frustrated frontline employees, you're lucky to get the money. And I also like to refer to it as you're going to get a smaller share of their pocket. They might see you first. Experience may not be great. They might walk down in the mall or walk down the strip center or walk somewhere else and somebody else treats them more appropriately. They end up spending all the money that they had and they never make it back to you. But I lived in Venice Beach. I used to go to a particular Starbucks in Santa Monica and the experience was fantastic. But every other Starbucks nearby was terrible. And so I knew the district manager was not doing a good job because they obviously had that entire subset of stores, most likely. But this one general manager was fantastic. And so I kept going back to that one store, even though I passed 2 of them to get to it. And that's what customers will do. So all the way, whether it's a store leader or all the way up to the CEO, like everybody really needs to ensure that they're creating the environment where people are appreciated and being productive. And if they do that, the customer is going to choose you as long as your product is obviously what they're looking for.
I think I actually know the Starbucks you're talking about. You'd never know it from the accent, but I lived in LA for several years.
Oh, nice. I loved it.
And I had my favorite Starbucks in Santa Monica.
It could have been the same. We could have both gone to the same one. So the very last portion of the book I talk about is Retail University. I believe anybody in retail, regardless of role, can be an expert at what they do or best in class in 3 to 5 years. Retail is really not any different. If everybody took that approach to understand, I have to start out as a freshman. I have to take the classes that are fundamental to your character. I have to upskill, take my communication classes, my influence classes. I have to be able to do those things before I can graduate. Then I'm going to be in a good place. But my hope, again, is that folks will start to take more control of their own career outcomes. And in doing so, if everybody does that, obviously organizations will be more productive.
Yeah, that's great. And it certainly has been true in my retail career as well. So how do you see the interplay between technology and people power taking shape, Brian?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because if I'm shopping in a store, if most people are shopping in a store, I think they want to have a really good experience with the product and with the people. I think that's where the initial investment should be to be able to make sure that the stores are what they need to be. I think smaller companies, I think we're going to see them invest more in technology in the store itself because they only have a small footprint of stores to fund into these things. I think when you have 1,000 store chains or 500 store chains, it's difficult to invest in these things and spend the money in bulk. And so they start with little pilots and then they see what is happening from there. So I think more often than not, the smaller companies with smaller footprints are going to kind of pave the way for some of the newer technology. But I would recommend that folks spend that on distribution centers and speed and just really making sure that when I'm an employee in a store, what I'm dealing with is seamless as possible so that I can enjoy the human interaction, which is why they came to us. They would have just bought it online if they didn't care for the human interaction.
So stay with the fundamentals and think about removing obstacles before you start chasing the shiny objects.
The shiny penny. I've been called a shiny penny before too by bosses. Like, you may be a shiny penny. Let's see if you can hold it together for your second year. But I do. My guess is a company is going to be financially in a place to invest in the shiny penny if they've done the fundamentals really well.
Great point. So what do you see as the most effective ways for retailers to win the talent wars, whether that's in recruiting or retention?
I think the first thing, and I kind of go back to that accepting and embracing reality comment earlier, I think companies have to accept, acknowledge, and embrace the importance that people really have. And that, I think, is a big win for companies because it's a differentiation. We know people don't just work for paychecks. We know through every survey we've ever done, pay is not the reason why people leave. People leave because of people. So to me, organizations have to do everything they can to have a best-in-class workforce. And so who you promote, who you hire, super important. And you have to put the work into it. And I don't think it's just the perks. I think it's teaching people how to interview, how to assess, how to make sure that they're hiring the right people, how they're selecting the right people for promotion. Because if you want to promote somebody who's a leader, I don't care what they're doing. I care what their people are doing. So you have to skip level. You have to know how the customer is being taken care of. I think we could offer great pay, great benefits. But if people aren't feeling fulfilled at the end of the day, somebody else is going to offer them the same thing or maybe even slightly less, and they're going to capture that talent. I left this for the very last, almost the last chapter of the book because I knew some people are going to like this part. If your boss and their boss don't support you and don't champion you, you're stuck. So you have choices to make. And this is where I think the challenge comes in terms of like other organizations. You have to make sure that you're in alignment with them in order for them to champion you to help you get where you want to get to. If you're not, then you're stuck. And when you're stuck, you're not delivering A performances. You're unhappy. You're not fulfilled. And so if the majority of people working for people aren't being championed by their bosses, they're going to be giving you 70% of what they have. And that's one of the reasons why we're in the predicament that we are in today, which is where people are budget cutting people out of jobs left and right and downsizing left and right because they're not getting the productivity of the people. Not for a lack of work and effort. They're working and they're sweating, but they're not as committed emotionally to the work. They're rationally committed to the work and the paycheck. We have to do a better job of emotionally connecting with folks to be able to get the levels of productivity that we need so that companies can start to flourish again more often than not.
Well, I like that point too. Again, looking at reality, I know I've had to do that in my career, and I couldn't agree with you more. Going back to that self-determination and that self-diagnosis, if you're in a stuck situation, it really is up to you to get unstuck. No one's going to do it for you and pry you out of there.
I'll give you an example, and I talk about this in the book too. So there was a period of time where I was miserable, and I'm a very happy person. Like I'm going to wake up in the morning, I'm cheerful, and I was just unhappy. I was coming home from work miserable. I was leaving for work miserable, and that's not. And my wife looked at me one day, and by the way, my wife is an executive coach, and she owns 2 fitness studios, and I get it every day, like I'm being coached every day. And she said to me, she said, look, you're going to have to meet your boss 51% of the way minimum because they're not going to meet you. It's not going to happen. So you're going to have to let your ego or your guard down first, or you have to leave.
What did you decide?
I let my guard down. I met him 75% of the way. I went an extra 25%. Next thing you know, they were meeting me 75% of the way. And we ended up in a great relationship, and we helped each other out for a few years, and I think benefited each other in our careers and definitely drove the business. But I had to do it first, and I was the employee.
Well, let me ask you, what did that look like?
when I say meet them where they are, I had to give them what they needed and what they wanted. I had to provide them the service that they were looking for. And so if it was something that I didn't agree with, I would bring it up and maybe have a dialogue about it. But Stephen Covey, 7 Habits, I read the book 30 some odd years ago. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. And so that's what I did. Every single time he needed me to do something or wanted something or made something important that maybe I didn't understand, I said, let me try to understand this first. Before I disagree or before I combat it, let me try to understand it. And then if it isn't something I can understand or something that I would disagree with, I would then have some facts to be able to bring up. But I had to be willing to provide a service. Some people would refer to it as kissing up or all these other types of things. No, it's not. Your bosses are going to want people that are going to help them accomplish what they need to accomplish. And oh, by the way, their boss will as well, because their boss is going to want to see you as somebody that they can have work for them. So you have 2 people that if you want to be unstuck, you're going to have to make sure you align to. And I recommend folks do the good work to figure out how to. And if they can't, they need to go find somebody else. Because if they don't, somebody's going to make the decision for them. And that's what I think has been happening, even with budget cuts. I think people use the budget cut at times to make sure that they're left with those that they really want on the team that they know will align to the work that they're trying to accomplish, whether it's the right work or not.
That was some really, really great coaching there. And I think that was very candid of you to admit that. And I can think of times in my career too where I've had to do that, the same thing. And it is amazing what can happen when you give in a little bit and try to see another perspective, then make that a habit.
Absolutely.
This is the People-Powered Retail series. So I'm going to ask you, what does people-powered retail mean to you, Brian?
What I'm going to tell you also ties into a particular portion of the book that I wanted to talk about. People prioritized with processes to support equals performance. What I talk about is in the very beginning of the building of your plan portion of the book, I talk about how you have to earn to learn. There will be no space for you to learn if you're not earning. If you think about when you go to university or go to college, you got to pay for it. Now, some of you might have been lucky enough to have your parents pay for it. Maybe you got a scholarship, but a lot of you are working at the same time as you are going to school. Retail careers or careers in leadership really not any different. You have to deliver the day job to have space to learn. And so for me, the first advice to folks is you have to have what I call podium performances. My father said very clearly, you always should be first, second, or third, and never fourth or worse. Make it to the podium every single time. And if so, you'll likely reach gold more often than not. Don't have to be number one, but you have to get to the podium. And so my father told me that 40 years ago, and it's stuck with me ever since. And I came up with the 5 P's of performance, which is people and product prioritized with processes to support equals productivity, which delivers performance. People is first. Product is a close second, but you have to prioritize your people and you have to prioritize your product. Not all people are created equal, and this really offends some people. They're not. Somebody's running a $15 million business, and somebody's running a $100 million business. That $100 million business leader requires and should require a bit more attention. So folks have to learn how to prioritize. I believe in a 20-70-10 theory. And so 20% of your people are your best, 70% of your people are in the middle, and 10% of your people are at the bottom. I want to think that the 10% can still be very capable, just happen to be 10th out of 10. And so, yes, maybe they're not capable and you have to performance manage, but hopefully more often than not, they're capable leaders that just happen to be your 10 if you have 10 people. But if you spend the majority of your time with your most important people, and I know that sounds bad because all people matter, and you make sure that they are influencing everybody else through their actions and through their behaviors, now you're actually influencing everybody by spending time with those that have the greatest output and greatest influence. And that they start to grow and develop, and they start helping you develop the rest of the fleet as well. And so I encourage people, if they're going to spend a lot of time in stores or spend more times in certain regions or certain districts, bring people to you. Let them experience it. You can still spend physical time with people, but what happens more often than not is people spend time with their problems, and that means they're just going to continue to have problems because they're not strengthening the core of their team and they're not strengthening their best players. People also have to be prioritized, but you also still have to get to everybody. And that's going to require you to have a certain system, routine, or process that allows that to happen.
I love the summation there that people-powered retail is in some ways leveraging the power of influence and unapologetically investing in your best performers in order to realize the impact that their influence can have on others. It becomes sort of a cascading exponential effect.
It does. But use an example of 10 direct reports is kind of normal in the retail world, whatever level you might be. Some less, some maybe more. If my best 2 people are acting in such a way that inspires the 7, and if they're helping me develop the 1 at the bottom, the system's working. Like I'm spending 51% of my time with 2 people, the other 49% with everybody else. I'm bringing them to me, but I'm getting out of the top 2 what I need. The 7 and the 1 are going to get what they need as well. But you have to work the system. The routine is as important as anything else.
That's great. I like it too because it's much more of a carrot versus a stick approach.
Oh, absolutely.
Keeping it aspirational rather than just browbeating the so-called alleged underperformers.
100%.
I end every interview with one question that I'll pose to you right now to answer any way you like. What's next, Brian?
What's next? So you mentioned at the beginning, March 12th, the Retail Leaders Roadmap will drop. My first book, I'm looking forward to it. I'm excited. 11 months of work, 35 years of labor. I'll be in Las Vegas at Shop Talk March 17th through the 20th for another podcast, as well as a book signing and joining the tech group out there. Hopefully, I'll be spending some time at the University of Texas in Dallas as well later in the month of March for another book signing. And my wife and I co-own a business called the Well-Wisher Company. And the retail Well-Wisher is what I'm doing. And her Well-Wisher is the work that she does. And she's been doing that for 10 years. And that's in support of all things her. Started out as a mental and physical fitness business, and it's evolving into more than that. So you'll start to see a lot more from the Well-Wisher Company in the near months as well.
That's exciting. Congratulations. I really look forward to following your ongoing trajectory, this next chapter, pun intended, with your book and all that will follow from that, and also seeing you hopefully at some events this year.
Absolutely, Carol. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed the conversation.
You bet. It was a pleasure. To learn more about Brian's work and to follow the book release and all the events surrounding it, visit retailleadersroadmap.com and follow Brian on LinkedIn at Brian Librach, Librach. I hope you enjoyed the episode, and if you did, you can invite me to your organization or event to bring conversations like this to life in your spaces. This is what I do for a living: retail B2B coaching, training, and executive consulting. If it has to do with retail thought leadership, B2B market positioning, and business development, it's probably something I can help you with. If you're interested in how we can work together, reach out to me at speakermanretail.com or email team@speakermanretail.com to book a discovery call. See you next time.